Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie. That is Mario Puig. Today's episode, a bit of a, we're doing some thought leadership. This is a pretty high-minded episode topic. So we're going to be talking about veterans, which crazy to do the month of the draft, but we're going to weave some of that in. But
we've already settled the draft, John. We told everybody how it all works.
The episodes are all in the RotoWire podcast feed, the RotoWire Fantasy Football podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find it beautifully labeled: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, you name it. So it's all there. You guys can get yourselves caught up if you haven't already. But we're going to be talking about some veterans as far as the best ball market is concerned, because this is an interesting and important time. That the draft is this huge kind of event in the offseason that can really alter the shape of the ADP markets. So we're going to be talking about some vets who we actually think are rather safe, rather insulated from whatever happens with their teams in the draft. And then we'll flip it to the other side of the coin and some guys that we think might be on relatively thin ice with the draft coming up, some guys that might lose a little bit of value. But to kind of like start things out so everyone can understand where we're coming from here, we'll start with the receivers, and we're going to cut the first 5-6 rounds out or so, because those guys are all fairly obvious picks, but things get a little bit more in the eye of the beholder the further down in the draft you get. So I wanted to start with Khalil Shakir because he had such an incredible year last year. One of the all-time value guys from last year's draft crop for best ball, of course, not the actual draft. Gets this big new contract with the Bills, but I guess there might be some question as to whether can he build on this past season, or are there any threats when it comes to the Bills? Just kind of the theory makes sense in a way. Do they want to just continue to stockpile the weaponry for Josh Allen? They obviously added Keon Coleman last year. We're still kind of waiting on Dalton Kincaid to do his thing. If that ever happens, I'm a little dubious on that. But regardless, Shakir going early 7th. Do we feel like that's a safe, insulated kind of ADP that when it comes to looking at him, if you're going receiver in that range?
I think so, but I might be a little biased just because I think Shakir is good. I thought he was a really good prospect, to the point that I thought he belonged in the 2nd round out of Boise State. And when he went to the 5th, I didn't understand that at all. And since then, all he's really done is play really well. And last year was a weird situation for Shakir, because he was at once producing at a blistering pace on a per snap basis, and yet would kind of get rotated out a lot. There was a very horizontal rotation of receivers in that Joe Brady offense. Normally I love Joe Brady, and I think as a run game designer, he's been particularly interesting, which is kind of funny given that he was originally like the LSU guy with Joe Burrow and Chase and Jefferson. But the Mac Hollins blocking receiver role played as many snaps about as the Khalil Shakir wide receiver 1 pass catcher role. And I'm sure Joe Brady has his ostensible reasons. I hate that stuff. I think it just isn't good. I think it's crap. And I think it's particularly bad when a guy like Shakir was as productive on a per snap basis as he was last year. And Shakir only played 544 snaps in the regular season. Granted, he missed 2 games, or didn't play in 2 games, but for a guy to have 100 targets on less than 550 snaps at once is probably not fully sustainable. That target rate is probably a little bit informed by Shakir playing in situations where he was highly likely to be used, which wouldn't necessarily hold if he played every single snap. But all this guy does is rake for them, and they're paying him enough now that I feel like they're borderline compelled to give him more snaps. So as much as I think Josh Palmer can play the slot a little, and as much as I wish, admittedly, that Shakir was more clearly unique amongst this group, even Curtis Samuel, if that guy takes a bunch of slot snaps next year, that wouldn't be shocking to me because I'm kind of convinced he played last year on a bad foot or something. But for Shakir, he's so good on a per snap basis, and to be so automatic with his per target usage, and then now get paid a nice raise, I think he's one of the best values on the board at receiver, actually, for best ball anyway.
I do too. And our guy Jamie in the chat mentions that he's been getting a decent amount of Shakir where he's going in drafts, and I'm definitely all for it, and I'm definitely just like not super worried about the role going away. Like it's going to be hard to match that efficiency that he had last year. I mean, like I forget if he like set the record for catch rate relative to like his target volume, but
he had it for like 2 years
automatic
or something. Yeah, he had it for a while there, and then he fell to 76% catch rate last year.
Just unplayable at that rate. But no, I think is safe, and I don't really envision the Bills like getting a difference maker early on, and they did add Josh Palmer. Maybe he takes on that Mac Hollins role that you alluded to earlier. So either way, I feel like Shakir is one of those vets that we don't have to worry about the draft having too much of an impact on their ADP.
I think so too. And if you get Shakir in redraft, so we've been saying best ball specifically, but if you get Shakir in redraft, I think he's gold there too. Just keep him in the lineup. Like you think of him more as like a wide receiver 3. And if he has a 4-point week, don't consider benching him the next one because he will bounce back.
Yeah, he's going to give you the catches, the yards. The touchdowns are obviously like harder to predict for a guy like him or to project. But even still, I think just from a consistency basis, like he really checks that box about as well as anybody. The next guy I wanted to bring up, a receiver that goes almost 2 rounds later, about a round and a half or so, is Darnell Mooney, and I might be a little bit biased because I drafted a lot of Mooney last year and was very happy with the end results. I know that there's a little bit of maybe consternation with what does this passing offense look like with Michael Penix there for the full season. I thought he looked fine enough in his kind of cameo towards the end of last year. But you have Drake London, you have Kyle Pitts, you got Bijan Robinson. Like that's all well and good. So that you're talking about spending an 8th, 9th round pick on a guy who might be like the 3rd, 4th piece of a given offense, but he was kind of it. Not to draw like the direct parallel to Shakir, but like pretty much any time that he was asked to do something, like he produced. Like he had a huge percentage of the team's air yards, good target share, good yards per route run. So the efficiency was good. The catch rate's not quite what Shakir's was, but he runs a little bit deeper down the field. His ADOT was 12.5. So I feel like Mooney did well enough last year to where it's like I don't expect the Falcons to kind of rock the boat with his role. Am I wrong?
I agree that his role, especially in terms of his playing time and probably in terms of like his per snap returns, it's probably going to be mostly the same. But the one thing I wonder about is whether the Falcons might change that 3rd receiver spot. So Ray McCloud, not always, but mostly played in the slot. It was mostly London and McCloud played the slot last year, and I feel like London took a little more slot work as the year went on. And I think at that point, McCloud playing on the boundary was just sort of like a by default outcome, since the Falcons for some reason, it would not consider maybe we should just bench Ray McCloud. So it was Mooney was getting kind of stuck with the decoy routes, and that's something he's good at. I mean, he's a speedy, credible downfield threat. So Mooney as a decoy is a highly effective wide receiver 2 type on the boundary, but for fantasy that's not ideal, of course. And so I think while if I was in the Falcons' position, what I would do is I'd probably try to find some way to keep Mooney involved as a target. I don't want Mooney to just be a decoy. Like he's too good of an actual receiver to reduce him to that. But it'd really be nice if the Falcons drafted a receiver who sends McCloud to the bench, but doesn't draw targets at a really high rate. And I don't even know what I'm thinking of as like a particularly scary scenario exactly, but like if Mooney could, if they could replace McLeod, and if that replacement receiver could take some of the decoy functions off of Mooney's plate, I absolutely think that if Penix is competent enough, then the Falcons can get more productive targets yet to Mooney. But in the meantime, I do worry a little bit that Mooney in redraft is a clear backup. The kind of guy, like if you have to start him, it's not a big deal. And especially with bye weeks and injuries, it's like he could very well turn out to be a good backup. But whereas in the redraft situation with Shakir, I feel like you can kind of, or rather you have to keep Shakir in your lineup every week if you take that plunge. I feel like with Mooney, you should more so aim to have him as like your wide receiver 5 or something like that. So he's more the type who plays when your first 2 get hurt or something. And that way, I mean, you'll never be able to perfectly evade the inconsistencies that come with like a high ADOT decoy prone receiver, but Mooney can definitely play, and like the weeks that he gets targets, he almost always returns production. So I think he's like a good backup for redraft. And in best ball, pretty much most of those concerns evaporate. Like in best ball, I think Mooney's just a conventionally sound value.
I think so too. So you think end of the 8th round, beginning of the 9th is, so if you're shopping for a receiver there, that's someone you'd take.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head what the alternative candidates are, but in best ball, especially if you're taking on any notable amount of volume, that part of the draft you really want to diversify a little bit, because it's not fair, but things do come down to luck sometimes. And if this guy or that gets dealt a bad hand, it can kind of be like the right player, the right pick, and still not work out. But as long as Penix is okay, and not that I know what to think about that, I'm kind of worried about Penix, but Mooney's just proven he's a good player. Like he's a clear, at worst, average starter.
Yeah, I think so too. And with that in mind, and having it, best ball, you can kind of convince yourself of a whole bunch of different stuff. Especially
everything's
if you're,
permitted.
Yeah. So it's like, what if Penix is awesome? That, and the arm strength, I think, pairs well with what Mooney can do as far as his skill set is concerned. So I feel like I'm not worried about the draft like shaking things up as far as Mooney's ADP is concerned. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned Ray McLeod, like the depth chart, you do kind of expect the Falcons to get some semblance of a pass catcher or two, because it's ugly. Like you got Kadarius Hodge, Chris Blair, who I'm not totally even sure
John,
of.
They run what is basically like supposed to be a McVay kind of offense. So they want the tight end to be Tyler Higbee, which of course Kyle Pitts is not. And it's why they give so many snaps to Charlie Werner. And it puts that much more slack on the third receiver rep. So yeah, as much as I think Mooney can withstand it because he is so good in his own right, the Falcons would be completely crazy to not get a decent like third receiver upgrade over McLeod. If you're running a 3 wide base, you cannot be screwing around with players like McLeod playing so much as 250 snaps, let alone 800 or whatever he did last year.
No, that was too much. Like I enjoyed Ray McLeod at Clemson. I don't find him to be like a every down type of guy in a functioning NFL offense. Let's get over to the next guy who goes a few picks later. This is a tricky one for a multitude of reasons, kind of beyond the draft. We're talking about the Saints. We're talking about Rashid Shaheed, obviously coming off the injury, and it's the Saints. Like we don't know what the quarterback situation looks like. We don't know how easily the Kellen Moore offense is going to be installed there in New Orleans. So a lot to kind of unpack when it comes to investing in Shaheed. I feel less strongly about the draft having a big impact on him. I think he showed enough early on last season.
He's a really good player.
And previously that this is a guy that can absolutely stick. But everything else in mind to factor in here, where are you with Shaheed as like an early 9th round type of guy?
In best ball, this is a stupid thing to realize this late and on the air or whatever, but in best ball, I kind of want Shaheed, and I'm realizing now I don't have any shares of him. So I guess I need to change that. But he is the ultimate best ball receiver. And as a redraft receiver, he's in that Darnell Mooney category to me, where it's like, I know he's going to have these startable weeks where you're like, he's going to be on your bench and you're going to be like, oh God, why didn't I start him? But if you have to start a guy like Shaheed, first of all, I think you should just start him. You know that the highs will come with lows, and so the lows are not grounds for benching him. But in best ball, it's just so much less stress, and it's basically just all gravy in best ball. So he really is a great best ball production profile at receiver. And the one thing here is I do expect Shaheed to miss more games going forward. Not as in like he'll be out for week 1. I mean, like, this guy has had a long injury history already. He was hurt a lot at Weber State. It's pretty much why he went undrafted. He tore his ACL in something like the 3rd game his senior year at Weber State. And I think he might have had some other kind of meniscus thing back then too. Don't hold me to that. I can't remember, but he was like an injury red flag as a prospect, to the point that he barely was able to play. He couldn't run a 40, all that stuff. So Shaheed is a like blistering threat when on a per snap basis. And I think it doesn't matter what kind of offensive scheme you're running, like a guy like Shaheed will force his way into your plans as a play caller, because he's just such a unique, easy source of explosiveness that you'd be crazy to not go to him repeatedly. But I do not expect Rashid Shaheed to play a full season pretty much ever in his career from this point. And while I'm trying to be optimistic enough to not fear the meniscus thing specifically, the knee is the specific area of concern with him even before this injury. So you just got to understand when you're drafting Shaheed that you are chasing something kind of radioactive, and radioactivity can be harnessed toward useful ends and sometimes less useful ends.
Yeah, he's tricky. I think you said it exactly right when you said that, he's just kind of like the ultimate like best ball type of guy to target, because the spike weeks will be there, but you have to worry about the injuries and just kind of like the general hard to know what to expect when it comes to that Saints offense this year. But yeah, I think I need to get a little bit more exposure to that radioactivity that is Shaheed.
We could all use 9th. More. Yeah.
We could. Next one. This one's kind of a funky one, and I will kind of like give a disclaimer at the beginning here, where it's like there are 2 receivers going right around him that I'm going to take almost every single time instead of this guy. But alas, but Marvin Mims, I think, is interesting because his ADP has risen a lot. He's a top 10 round selection. End of the 9th is where he tends to go. He hasn't fully broken out yet, but you look at this Broncos depth chart, and obviously Cortland Sutton is kind of like the straw that stirs the drink as far as that passing game is concerned. They had Evan Ingram, of course, this offseason, but Mims, people have been waiting on it. I was certainly over my skis about Marvin Mims a couple of years ago when he came into the league. I think people are just kind of optimistic about this Broncos offense taking another step forward. And, theoretically, Marvin Mims should be the wide receiver 2 in this offense. But are you convinced of that? Or do you think that the Broncos continue to add via the draft that could complicate things? Is Troy Franklin's development something that could hinder the Marvin Mims breakout, or even Devon Vele?
It could be. I guess the one thing I'll say about Vele, he, I think, looks like a good player, but he mostly played in the slot last year, to the extent that as much as Vele played well, it'd be a little bit of a leap of faith, I think, to just assume he could be equally effective on the boundary, even though he's a totally good athlete and he's got the build for it. It's just presumably there was some reason that Sean Payton had Vele just in the slot, but we'll see. I think the problem for Vele is that Evan Ingram is going to be the slot receiver going forward. And so the playing time opportunity and the target opportunity is more so on the boundary, where Mims, I think with Mims's build, you traditionally worry that he's going to get restricted to the slot, but he very rarely played the slot last year. which I think is encouraging because when you look at, as much as there were a lot of screens in this sample, when you look at the per snap target rate for Mims, 52 targets on 287 snaps, that's a lot, even if there's a lot of screens in there. And to be drawing those targets on the boundary where it's more difficult than the slot in general, I don't know. I think Mims is really good. I'm biased because I thought he was a great prospect, and it's hard for me to forget that when his per snap returns have just been fully locked automatic in a way like very few players. Like Khalil Shakir is the only player who's as remotely as efficient the last 2 years as Marvin Mims at receiver. And this is all the case without Mims being like gifted with like easy circumstances or great quarterback plays. Like he's just, especially the last like 6 weeks last year, go look at what Mims did. He was torching. And I know Sean Payton is liable to always do these rotations. And I know a guy like Vele clearly is good. A guy like Franklin might be good. I just think those two are more a problem for each other, and Evan Ingram a problem for them than Mims is. I think Mims is more so just like the clear wide receiver 2 on the boundary after Sutton. And I'm sure Mims's slight frame will result in some rotation for blocking related reasons. It's just like, but it's like if Troy Franklin's the alternative, this other even more of a string bean, like Troy Franklin is something like 3 inches taller than Marvin Mims and still lighter than him. So Troy Franklin isn't blocking anybody. Lil Jordan Humphrey, thank God, is on the Giants now. So I would argue that I got a really good case for why I am so high on Mims, but I still have to put up the disclaimer that I might be irrationally high on him. I'm higher on Mims than pretty much anybody.
Right. So Jamie chimes in, asking, has Mims even played half the snaps in a game yet?
Probably not. But if you're Sean Payton and if you're Bo Nix, do you really look at those last 6 or 7 games and think like, how can we get this guy off the field? How can we put Troy Franklin on the field? And by the way, Troy Franklin was terrible last year. So not that that's a huge deal. He's a rookie. He's supposed to be terrible. But if you're the Broncos and if you were maybe trying to figure out like, where did we go wrong? What's one way we could maybe do better as a team? You can look at Mims and you can look at Franklin. And in Mims's case, he's just murdering. When you send him targets, he murders. There's no exception. He just kills. And then there's Troy Franklin, who has 53 targets for 28 catches and 263 yards. I think we know what gets slashed from this budget, and it's not Mims.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely room for Mims to have that increased role within this offense. The last 5 games last year averaged 15.2 points per game in half-point PPR scoring. So we definitely like that. So I think that he's safe in the sense that I don't think that he gets drafted over or that Franklin eats off of his plate or Vele to a lesser extent. And that, I buy the skills and everything. But if the market is giving me Rashod Bateman at the same time or Hollywood Brown, I'm probably leaning with
Hollywood.
Those guys.
Yeah, I've been drafting way too much Hollywood just like last year.
But
this time it will for sure work.
It has to.
Christian Kirk in that range for me is one of the other guys that's kind of forcing me to diversify between like him and Mims and maybe like I was saying before, I probably got to get some Shaheed. But in best ball at price, I just think Mims is free space at this price. If he goes something like 9th or 8th round, that's pressing the margins a bit more. But I don't know. I mean, Mims has just torched, even going back to Oklahoma. Whenever he gets a chance, he just murders. And I don't doubt that there's some kind of reason that coach, like Sean Payton, for instance, was kind of like, I got to rotate him out in this case. But when he keeps making plays like that, you just sort of let things like that go. You start to remember like, oh, we throw him the ball, we get yards. I remember that. I remember it more today than I did the day before that and the day before that because it keeps happening more. And I don't mean to claim that I can anticipate anything Sean Payton thinks because I can't. He's a pretty eccentric coach, good as he might be. But I feel like Marvin Mims is just such an obvious, it's more obvious than common sense kind of thing. It's like, this guy torches when you throw him the ball, so just throw him the ball, stupid. And I think he's gaining just enough traction in the organization that it's like everybody's starting to notice it by now.
Yeah, so like if we're having this conversation a year from now, like, he might be top 5 round type of guy.
I hope so. I think I think he definitely has the ability to do that if given the opportunity. But admittedly, if only because it's Sean Payton, and if only because I also don't think Bo Nix is that good. Like I think he's pretty good. I think he's he had a really promising rookie year, but I think he's going to trend toward average among league starters, and I don't really see Bo Nix being like a 4,500 yard passer. Meanwhile, Sutton is obviously very good. Engram, I think, is going to have a monopoly in the slot pretty much. Vele is not disappearing. Franklin isn't disappearing. So it might require injuries for Mims to have that good of an outcome, but I absolutely believe if you give Mims 800 snaps, you're getting 1,200 yards. I don't think it's a serious question at all.
Yeah, no, and like, even going back to his Oklahoma days, like you mentioned, like what I liked about his production profile at Oklahoma is that like he was kind of asked to do 3 different things during his 3 seasons there, and like he crushed it in each of, like, there's one where he's just kind of like the big play freshman, another where he's just like a target monster. Like he's capable of doing pretty much anything you ask of him, like, within reason. I feel like
he's got great ball skills. I mean, you see him track downfield targets. Like he's a magnet to the football, and it's so easy to get yardage with this guy. I can't believe he's even been held back this much this long.
And in regards to my Bateman comment, I can feel the eyes rolling from our listeners as Ravens guy, but obviously it's an offense that doesn't throw a ton relative to the rest of the league. And you got Zay Flowers eating up a lot of targets. You got the tight ends eating up a lot of targets. They had DeAndre Hopkins, but I think Bateman showed a lot last year, and it was really impressive to see what he can do when he's fully healthy. And I think you're just kind of buying a piece of an offense that's going to be scoring a ton of points. And Bateman is kind of like the de facto downfield guy as far as what we can project from the 3 wide set there in Baltimore. So I like Bateman where he's going as well. So that was my kind of case for taking Bateman over Mims. But I think that I'll be doing
it's a diversification point.
There.
Like at a lot of points in the ADP, we just have to be resigned to the fact that even if we're right, it can still go wrong, and you just have to diversify to appease the gods.
You do. And then on the other side of the coin, a vet who might be on thinner ice here as the draft approaches and all that. Your thoughts on George Pickens? We talked a little bit about him off air before we jumped on here. Some concern potentially?
It's I guess I should say always with Pickens there's some kind of concern, but I guess more specifically we got to try to figure out like what is the level of realistic and actionable concern here. I think the Steelers clearly do not want to re-sign George Pickens. I think their urgency in targeting DK Metcalf, not that Metcalf wasn't worth it on his own part, but I think they were chasing kind of a security there that Pickens just does not give them. Maybe Pickens will grow up. Things like that have happened. I mean, there's been really, really crazy guys who have kind of just one day been like, they get. Sometimes it doesn't take. It takes till they get to like 27 though is the problem, and Pickens is like 24 right now. He might have some kind of like self-reflection phase, but it might not be here yet. And if you're the Steelers, you kind of just gotta do something. You at once cannot sign Pickens to a huge extension right now. Yet, you got to get someone who can be a pillar in this offense. This offense that's supposed to be so run heavy and pressing the corners, the end zone corners with downfield passing threats on a low volume passing game. Metcalf is perfect for that. Pickens would be perfect for the other side. And I think the Steelers are going to try to run it back one more time with him. But the fact is Pickens is on the last year of his rookie deal. And if Pickens behaves this year like he has the previous years, he can be super productive, and the Steelers would still kind of be like looking for the exit ramp anyway. And if they're looking for the exit ramp right now, and if they're urgent about it, if they're like, we have to reduce our Pickens dependence, it would not be shocking to me if the Steelers spent a high draft pick on a receiver, maybe even like the first round, because it would be obvious enough. They'd be thinking like, oh, well, Pickens will walk after this year. So, right. Or maybe they'd be trying to trade him even. That could happen in the draft. Like Pickens could get traded to some team during the draft, especially if the Steelers secure some whatever, like Jayden Higgins or some guy who can just plug in and make Pickens' absence like a non-issue. I kind of think the Steelers would take that opportunity. So, but it's a volatile situation. It's pretty much the most volatile receiver. I don't know, like T.O. or something like that, where it's like,
yeah,
the guy is so talented. It's unbelievable how talented he is. But, Mike Tomlin is the last coach in the league who can make exceptions to the culture and like the commitment to the team. That seems like an insane thing to say as they're about to sign Aaron Rodgers. But that's why maybe you could see it as like, look, this is the year of Rodgers and Pickens, and next year it's something else. But it's tough because, man, Pickens is so good. And I don't think Metcalf, as long as Pickens plays 800 snaps, I think he will produce this year, even with Metcalf there. But my concern is maybe the Steelers take the opportunity to get someone else who reduces Pickens' snaps and target share a little bit. And then, not to say he would be useless in such a situation, but it's far from what you were hoping you'd get from Pickens, who could he can take over games when he's on. He's just outrageous when he's on.
Yeah, we've seen that before. I always go back to like Christmas weekend of the 23 season when the Steelers and the Bengals were playing on that Saturday game, and Pickens just went ballistic in that game. And then Amari Cooper the next day had like 250 yards or something like that. I remember this specifically because that like pushed me through to the Bestball finals on DraftKings. So shout out to that weekend. But before we move on, I do want to get a quick comment from you on the Packers receivers, not necessarily Jayden Reed, but when it comes to the sort of like secondary pieces in that passing game, like Wicks. Do you think the Packers like have any interest in shaking things up in the draft to the point where maybe those roles in that offense get a little bit muddied, or do you think that the Packers just kind of lean into the fact that they have all these young receivers on rookie contracts that have already played a little bit?
I could be wrong, but I thought the Packers were confirmed linked to DK Metcalf. They just simply did not want to offer as much as the Steelers did, so they just kind of bowed out of the bidding. I don't know what to make of that or almost anything else about how Matt LaFleur uses these receivers. I know you'll see some split data talking about how Jayden Reed is awesome versus zone coverage and terrible versus man coverage. I think that might be more of a Jordan Love thing. And in any case, I don't really understand why LaFleur does this hyper specialization thing with his wide receiver rotation. It's like Jayden Reed only played in the slot last year, even though he is not slot dependent, even though he was not slot dependent in college. LaFleur just to this point has not considered a different way of running things. And when Reed's per snap returns are as good as they are, and when there's these lags in the per snap returns of these other guys, especially Wicks. I mean, Wicks was murdering them last year. And if that didn't get LaFleur to realize, hey, this is a bad idea. I just should put my best players on the field instead of the players who look most like whatever prototypes I just arbitrarily plant into the various formation designs. You should just get your best players the ball. And if LaFleur has an epiphany on this fact, I think you could pretty easily turn this into like a Jayden Reed offense where the Packers still pursue another receiver, be it to kind of, I don't know, like I guess we can't really assume Watson's going to play because of that nasty injury.
Right.
I'm a little bit disillusioned with Wicks. I thought he was so bad last year, it wasn't worth the hype of his rookie year. And I think even the splitting the difference kind of thing leaves you with at most an average kind of receiver. But Doubs has the concussions, and I don't think the Packers appreciate his mental peculiarity. The way Doubs is, it's like he's a very particular personality.
Oh, right.
And,
yeah.
That always rubs these guys want to make the teams, something analogous to like the military, where like no one questions orders and you just respond on the orders and stuff like that. And Doubs rubs people the wrong way as far as that goes. So I think with Doubs on a personality basis, you could imagine the Packers being disillusioned. With Wicks, I think the results should give them reason to be disillusioned. And if they can get a guy, I guess I just don't know what kind of receiver they'd be targeting in the draft. If they took someone like Jayden Higgins, I think that'd be a great pick for the Packers or any team. But for Jayden Reed, I think as much as his ceiling is badly limited by this stupid slot-only usage that LaFleur does, he also can only go so low. Like, it's not as if LaFleur is going to start taking the slot snaps too from Jayden Reed and giving them to somebody else. So I feel like in a way Reed can only get better, and I feel like he would vindicate the decision to give him more usage and playing time if LaFleur were to do it. But I can also imagine that LaFleur has not learned any lesson on this front, and that the Packers are instead looking for probably in the second round, I guess, because they didn't offer a first for Metcalf is the problem, right? So it's like they're probably not going to be looking until the second round. Maybe they'll take somebody in the first if somebody falls the right way, but like they take a second round receiver who only plays on the boundary. I think that leaves us basically in the exact same spot we were last year with Reed. And I don't know what to tell anybody what to do with that. I think Reed is very good. And I personally can imagine a scenario where, if the right combination of injuries hit, maybe LaFleur feels compelled, or maybe LaFleur is compelled. Maybe he just has a game where Wicks and Doubs are hurt and LaFleur just doesn't have the depth to do the stupid. Last year, LaFleur would pull Jayden Reed to put Malik Heath on the field,
Yeah.
And if we can just get Jayden Reed on the field in those situations, I think the results would be good enough that LaFleur would realize just oh yeah, I see now why I should have given the target to my good receiver rather than the bad one, and now I can move forward. That's something that could happen, and sometimes coaches need their arms twisted that way. I just don't really think it's in. I like LaFleur, and I want to believe he can get better. But he's had the chance to already, and he stayed the same. So I'm not really believing things change a whole lot as far as that goes.
Yeah, Reed's going to be the main guy that I'm drafting, and obviously he's the highest ADP of that group of pass catchers. I don't know. Maybe I'll just be a Tucker Kraft guy when I'm drafting the Packers.
I do like Kraft.
Leave the receivers.
He's a really
alone.
good. They should use him more too, though. That's another thing. LaFleur wants the tight end to either be a Luke Musgrave type that plays in the slot, even though he's not good enough to play snaps there, so he just ends up being a scratch. And then they make the tight end position be a chip blocker that gets screens if the quarterback can't find anyone open. Tucker Kraft could be really good. In fact, LaFleur should just make it a Reed and Kraft passing game. It would be really good, but we aren't pushing the buttons. So
exactly, and it's again maybe the leopard just can't really change his spots there. We're going to get into some running back vets next, but first we got a message from our friends over at Ultra GM. Have you ever dreamed of managing your favorite pro football team? Do you watch your team and think the GM got it wrong? I don't know. Maybe we were just talking about that again. Do you think you can do better? Well, here's your chance to prove it. Introducing Ultra GM, a revolutionary new take on fantasy football that makes you the general manager of your favorite team. Start with the team's full roster and build it through the draft, free agency, trades, and even the practice squad to create your ideal team. No fantasy football platform or GM simulator has ever provided the degree of realism and engagement that Ultra GM offers. And none has ever given you the opportunity to manage the team that you love and care about the most. Compete against family, friends, and even your team's real GM to see who is the Ultra GM. You think you can do better than your team's GM? Well, visit ultragm.com to prove it. All right, let's grab a couple running backs here among the vets. Well, this guy changed places this offseason. We'll kind of, these guys are kind of intricately linked. So Najee Harris going to the Chargers, Jaylen Warren obviously staying in Pittsburgh. Najee, a early to mid 7th round type of guy, and Jaylen Warren, an early 8th guy. Either of these guys, are you feeling pretty confident that they're going to be able to like step into starters roles this year and not be too impacted by what happens in the draft?
I think so. They're both liable to have some significant running back two, kind of putting heat on them / stealing touches. But in the case of Harris, the fact that he is plotting and doesn't really do a whole lot in terms of explosiveness doesn't necessarily matter that much to the Chargers, because they just want to run a lot and they want someone who can eat up innings. And Harris can do that. But in Harris's case, I would worry about J.K. Dobbins re-signing there still. And as much as the Chargers are prepared to make Harris like a 20 carry back, especially if they have some leads, J.K. Dobbins is so explosive that they would probably come out to something closer to like a 50-50, or maybe like 15 carries to every 10 for Dobbins, something like that. And if Harris isn't getting short yardage touchdowns, he might, but if we're not taking it as a given that he will, then we also have reason to worry that he might, lose some of those innings to Dobbins and not have the explosiveness to make up for the leg there. So Harris, I think, is a guy you should expect to be more like a steady flex kind of stabilizer, like a guy who gives you like 6 to 15 points most weeks, but doesn't really have the ability to go over that much. With Jaylen Warren, I feel like it's a little more open-ended because Warren is more explosive, we saw that when those two guys were playing at Pittsburgh. But as a fantasy asset, Warren could never conclusively catch up to Harris because Harris was playing, like 2/3 of the snaps or whatever, or half the snaps anyway. So with Warren, he played out of the bullpen with Harris in Pittsburgh, but with Harris gone, I think Warren can definitely be the starter and like the workhorse of that offense, the same way he was at Oklahoma State and Utah State before the Steelers signed him undrafted as a rookie. So with that said, while I like Warren's ability to translate well as a starter, the fact in his case, I guess there's like a threat of a Dobbins type showing up there too, but I'm assuming more so the threat to Warren would be in the draft, because even if the Steelers go into the draft not looking at all to replace Warren, even if they're looking to just do everything else and not that, this is such a good running back class that teams might accidentally end up with like good players that they didn't even try to pick. They're just kind of like, oh, well, it's the late 5th and these other guys suck, so let's take this running back. And like that guy might have been a 3rd rounder last year or 2 years ago or something. So it would be easy for the Steelers to end up with a kind of player who can take snaps from Warren. I don't think Kenneth Gainwell is that player. I think Kenneth Gainwell is only a hurry up back, only a passing down back. And I still think Warren might be good enough that he can hold off a rookie, but it would be just, I think there's a chance the Steelers take like Caleb Johnson in the 4th round or something like that. And I would take the Jaylen Warren side of that pretty easily, but as a Jaylen Warren investor, admittedly, I would prefer that they not draft anybody like that.
Yeah, exactly. So that there is some risk there. And I think, over the years, you've kind of drawn it up really well when it comes to Warren, where a lot of his production, it is analogous to being like the flame-throwing closer and not having to eat up the innings ahead of him. So, there's always the question of, does this guy scale up? You talked about it with guys like Tony Pollard in the past. So yeah, will be interesting to see. And I think that, kind of as a result right now, like I'm probably leaving Warren be. And maybe if the Steelers do take a running back, especially one that I'm not super high on, kind of buy the dip when it comes to Warren after the draft. A little bit later on, 12th round, I think this is a pretty interesting question here when it comes to Jerome Ford in Cleveland. I feel like they are a team that can and should draft a running back, especially with a class like this. But if we're not seeing a running back come off the board for Cleveland until day 3 or something like that, with Nick Chubb being gone, I feel like Ford in the 12th is late 12th at that is, something to really kind of chew on a little bit.
That's late for Ford. Yeah, I think at once the Browns clearly do not want to make Ford like a workhorse grinder. I think they want Ford to be like a 45 to 55% of the snap workload running back who mostly works in passing down situations or takes up a disproportionate amount of the passing down situations. So on the one hand, I don't think Ford can scale up that much, but in the 12th round, that just doesn't really matter a whole, especially in best balls. Like, who cares? We know Ford's a pretty good player. And just because the Browns have designs to make him like a rotational guy, at that price anyway, I don't care so much about that, because like circumstance can just force their hand some other way. And we saw with Ford at Cincinnati, it's like he can be a starter. He doesn't need to be some like passing down guy. So yeah, I really like Ford at that price. I think you can like Ford at that price a lot, even if you assume that the Browns add another significant running back, because it's like you only need Ford to play something like 40% of the snaps to come through value wise at that price.
Yeah, so I like him where he's going right now, and I could see again, the Browns. It would definitely make sense for them to add to that backfield to try to make up for the loss of Nick Chubb. But regardless, I think Ford goes into the year as the starter. I think that there's decent projection there. It's just I'm mostly worried about how bad the Browns are going to be more than.
But that's why it all keeps coming back up Ford, because he's the passing down guy. So it's like if the Browns suck, it's the other running back that you worry about.
True. I wonder if. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Like, I wonder if they'd be interested in like Quinshon Judkins, being an Ohio State guy.
I guess on the one hand, sure, they might, but again, in the 12th round, I just don't know if that really presses Ford's margins that much. It's almost like you'd have to be worried that the Browns acquire a running back who straight up sends Ford to the bench for good. Which
they're not in position.
I won't say it's impossible, but it seems pretty close.
Yeah, they are not going to take Ashton Genty. I feel pretty good about that. Let's see here. Some other. I want to get. I got it. I feel like Brian Robinson is someone who is on the other end of this, where I feel like he's at risk of getting drafted over a little bit. He obviously has like some cachet in Washington, like that's clear. And it's an offense that everybody likes. I mean, with Jayden Daniels doing what he did last year,
they added Larry Tunsil.
Yeah, so I mean, the things are trending up, and it's like Robinson at once can do what you asked him, but he's never gonna like do more. He's never gonna like elevate the run game in particular. So I feel like Washington is kind of in that position, especially after having traded for Deebo Samuel. So they don't have to worry about like drafting a receiver particularly high. I feel like Washington's kind of a sweet spot for a rookie running back, and therefore Robinson as a late 11th guy. I mean, not that I was really drafting him much regardless of the price, but where he's going right now, I feel like that he's at risk of falling post-draft.
Yeah, as I so often have to, I got to give the disclaimer here that I think Brian Robinson is just horrible. I think he's truly awful. So when it comes to giving him credit where it's due, it's just hard for me. And I just the same, I don't know if I actually think Washington's going to draft a running back, because they're going in for sure with Robinson and Eckler, right? And Chris Rodriguez, they tried to just like not give him a chance last year. They did their best to pretend that he wasn't better than Brian Robinson, but he is. And when they gave carries to Chris Rodriguez, he just stomped like he always has when anyone has ever given him carries. So I think at once Washington probably just goes into the year with Robinson, Eckler, and Rodriguez on the depth chart. And yet I absolutely do not believe Robinson is safe from Rodriguez, because Rodriguez is a better player, and especially he's a better player as a runner. Robinson admittedly might be better than Rodriguez as a pass catcher. He probably is. As much as I bash Robinson, he's pretty solid on passing downs. He won't hurt a team there. And so Rodriguez can't take those snaps from him, but Eckler has those snaps. So I'm not drafting Robinson, but that's just to say, it's a year that ends in a number.
Yeah, exactly. I worry. I mean, Eckler, everyone on Washington kind of exceeded my expectations last year. I do wonder if Eckler kind of runs out of steam here and that they need to kind of come up with a succession
He eked
plan.
it out another year, but 2 years is harder than one for sure.
Yeah, so that's where my concern comes in as far as Washington maybe, thinking about the future a little bit more at that position. I think that pretty much covers it for this particular episode, talking about some vets and how the draft may or may not affect their ADPs. Big thanks to our sponsors over at Ultra GM and over at Blue Wire. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.